like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. We'd like to start out this evening by playing a short land acknowledgement video for everyone. So I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get that playing for everyone.
Okie.
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 Okie and welcome.
We acknowledge that we're gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains.
We pay respect to the Blackfoot people's past,
present,
and future.
We recognize the thousands of Indigenous peoples
From many diverse nations,
call Lethbridge home.
including members of the Blackfoot Confederacy,
The six gates of the beat,
Akana,
Siksika,
Amskapi people.
as well as other First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples.
We respect Indigenous people's cultural heritage,
beliefs,
truth
and relationship to the land.
that stretches back in time.
We will not blink at history.
We will not blink at history.
and we will learn from it.
Okie is an invitation.
A step forward.
In Blackfoot, Okie means hello.
Okie means hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Okie.
Okie. Okie, and welcome to the lands of the Blackfoot people.
Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Tonight, our guest is Dawn Dumont. Dawn is from the Okanese Cree Nation, located in southern Saskatchewan. She is the award-winning author of Nobody Cries at Bingo, Roses Run, and Glass Beads. Her first book, Nobody Cries at Bingo, was nominated last year for the Governor General's Award for English to French translation. Dawn is a keynote speaker, comedian, and humorist for Eagle Feather News and the Saskatoon Star Phoenix, and has previously written for both the Edmonton Journal and CBC Radio. Dawn has worked as a stand-up comic across North America, including New York's Comic Strip, the Comedy Club, the Improv, and Toronto's Yuck Yucks, and the Laugh Resort. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Dawn, and for being the final speaker in our fall reading series. I'm so glad you could join us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jonathan. And thank you for inviting me to be on the Blackfoot land. I really appreciate it. And that was a beautiful land acknowledgement. So thank you so much. I feel very honored.
The city of Lethbridge recently came out with the video, and I get chills every time I listen to it. I don't know. It just, there's something about it. They did the perfect job of putting it together.
Yeah, they really did. Mixing the different cultures and having the language, it's really good.
Yeah, it's amazing. So to start things off tonight, I thought maybe we could first get you to describe, for those in the audience who haven't had a chance to read the Prairie Chicken Dance Tour, what the book is about.
Well, first of all, Jonathan, I really like to write like stuff that's funny. I mean, that's what I like to read. And so like some of my favorite authors have a little bit of like a lot of comedic dialogue, you know, like David Sedaris and Eloise James. She's a romance writer who has fantastic dialogue, really intelligent, witty rapport. And so that's really like, for me, it's very interesting. And even when I watch TV, like that's what I want to see. Like I want to see that funny back and forth. So that was really my goal with any writing that I do. It doesn't have to be, you know, humorous all the way per se, because I do want to have that truth. And of course, truth includes sadness. With this particular novel, I was inspired. I work at the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, which is located in Saskatchewan. It's a political organization that's been around since 1946. And you know, there's so much like wealth of knowledge there. And they have this magazine. It's called the Saskatchewan Indian. Sask Indian for short. And I was reading it one day, and it was from 1972. And it was an actual tour that went to Europe. And it was a dance tour. And it was written in this very dry way, where I know the writer knew that some of their adventures were funny, but she was playing it down. And because there was one moment where they were completely broke, trying to find someone to cash a check for them in Europe. And, and I just was really like, it just really grabbed me. And so I was very inspired by that. And back when I was writing the novel, I was just heading into a maternity leave. And I thought, you know what? While I'm on maternity leave, I've got this novel all outlined out, and I will just write this book in like 2 months and whatever. So anybody who's ever been on maternity leave is now laughing because they're like, that's insane. And it did turn out to be quite a crazy idea. The book was actually written in only 10-minute increments. And I had an easy baby. So that's where the Prairie Chicken Dance Tour grew out of.
Okay. So I've read a couple of articles where you've been referred to as one of the hidden gems of Canadian fiction and the Canadian fiction scene. How does that make you feel, and does it put any pressure on you when you're writing?
Oh no, absolutely not. When I write, I'm just basically writing to entertain myself because I'm a lifelong reader. I grew up from lifelong readers. Both my parents were readers. My mother used to read 2 or 3 books a week. And one time our house was broken into, and I remember like you could see all the drawers were opened and every cupboard was opened. And if you looked in every cupboard, it was just like books jammed everywhere. So I felt sorry for the poor thieves, thinking that they were going to find something of value. And it was just books as far as the eye could see. So, and myself, like, to me, there's nothing greater than finding a book. And unfortunately, I still haven't learned how to savor a book. I still, swallow it in like a couple hour gulps and stuff like that. So if I could, I would read a book every single day if I could find a book that captured my interest. No, I don't really think about what people think of my writing. I only think about what I think of my writing. And I think that comes from being a lifelong reader. And you don't really think about the outcome. I think once you pass your early 20s, you're just sort of like, you're just doing it because you love it and you guys have a passion for it.
Here's what anybody else thinks. Like, I don't know. This one was a beautiful book. I loved it. So anybody who's looking for, actually listen to an interview on CBC where they recommended the book as a Christmas gift, and I have to second that. This book has such a balance between humor. There is some absolutely hilarious moments in it, and some of the more serious aspects too. It's just you couldn't have struck a more perfect balance, I don't think. It was absolutely wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
The situations in which your characters find themselves are hilarious, and some of them are almost bordering on the absurd with what happens to them. How do you come up with these different scenarios?
Well, in this book, I was kind of guided by, the subject matter, right? So I had like this travelogue in front of me, and some of it is based on something that actually happened. Like when they have the spots that they hit, that was in the original travelogue. So they hit Sweden, they hit Germany, they hit Rome. I'm missing one in there. But they did actually hit those places. So Chicago, they actually did hit those particular locations. So that sort of guided, the way that I was writing. And then I just had to like write the adventures in. This scene where they have a round dance on the top of a mountain, that really happened. And it was just so tremendously inspiring. Like, every day I'd be writing and I would be like, is this the day that I get to the round dance scene? Like, how do I get to the round dance scene? And it's very rare as a writer that you get to have that level of subject matter. But if you are a writer, you do not need that level of subject matter, because always remember that writing is just remembering. So it's already inside of you, and you'll always get there if you need to.
One of the sort of reoccurring themes in the book is the topic of residential school system. A lot of the characters have had some sort of experience with it. Can you talk about your approach to writing about these tragic events?
Well, I grew up with 2 parents who were who had both, spent a lot of time in residential schools, and who, for the most part of their life, were deeply in denial about the harm that they had experienced. My father, for one, never actually talked about it directly to us. but you could sense it in the way that he responded to things, and also with the level of dysfunction and addiction. And he wasn't, he's really struggled as a parent. My mother was a little bit more. She only spent a couple years in residential school, and then many other years as in day school. And then she was one of the very first students who actually integrated into a white school. And so she had all three different experiences that she could describe to us. So I think so then as an adult, I learned what happened in the residential schools, and it helped to answer so many questions. Because when you're a young person growing up in a dysfunctional home, you think that, like, what's going on? Is this what everyone's going through, right? And but then when you see the history, and you can sort of put it into context. So when I was writing, I didn't want to hammer people with how terrible it was, but I also didn't want to shy away with how terrible it was. And I still think that maybe I was a bit ham-fisted at times, but I also feel that I tried to bring across the difficulty of someone who was raised in the school, such as Edna, who loved the church, but who also had to reconcile the abuse that occurred. Because yes, there is denial, but there's also a subconscious level where denial can't exist. And that's where people, act out some of the worst trauma.
Right. With Edna in particular, she sort of had, when she describes her experience in the book, it's a lot different than how some of the other characters describe it. She sort of tries to pick the good out of the experience, I guess. Maybe it's more of, like you said, a denial experience. Could you talk about how, was it hard to write that perspective on things?
Surprisingly, no. I was the kid when I was younger who used to read the Bible all the time.
Right.
So my mother was a bit of a hypochondriac. It was a trauma response. So she used to go to the doctor all the time, and I used to go to the doctor with her. And the doctor had just religious books in his, in the reading area. So I would sit there as my mom was going to see the doctor about different ailments. And I would just like read all these religious books all the time. And I read everything, and I just became very interested in the Bible. And even though I'm not a practicing Catholic now, I read the Old Testament, I read the New Testament. So I'm very familiar with the Bible just from lack of other reading material. And so no, Edna was not difficult to write because I already had all that stuff in my head and no place to put it. When I was a young person, and my parents did make us go to church, I was actually a server in mass, which I insisted upon because I was a feminist, and I was just like, why should guys just get to serve? And so I was like, let me wear that shapeless gown. I will do it better. I honestly was the best server you've ever seen. Like when the priest would kneel down, I would just like see as he touched his knee to the altar, I would ring the bell. Like everybody else would like just leave him there hanging, but I was just like, the second he hit it, I rang the bell. I was an awesome server. But as I grew older, and I was in university, and I saw all the abuse that was coming out, probably mostly from the States at the time. All the abuse that the priests had done to children, and the way the church had moved around priests. And so I had to leave the Catholic Church just because I could not stand by, but I did try to still stick it out, because I was like, well, the church, does support community. And so I did try to stick to it, but in the end, I ended up leaving when I was about 18 years old.
Okay. Has there been any reaction at all to when Edna sort of characterizes how she learned to run a household and those positive experiences? Anybody ever said anything about that to you when in the news there's such, everything is about, especially with the recent, in the last year or so, with these mass grave discoveries and everything? Has there been any negative response, or have people been relatively positive?
I think the book's been pretty quietly received. it is an unusual book in the sense that I've never had people actually write to me and tell me how much they enjoyed a book like so often.
Mhm.
And I think that people do understand that Edna's coming from a very different place, you know. And I like even when the residential school apologists, such as that one misguided senator who tried
Yeah.
to defend residential schools, she was using, I believe there was a very famous Thompson Highway, who's a
Mhm.
tremendous author,
Yeah.
total genius. And he had said that, well, blah, 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 I learned these positive things. The positives don't take away from the obvious trauma and negatives
No.
and, you know, generations of abuse. Um, they don't. But I think that people do understand, that she's clinging to certain parts of herself, right? Because I mean, when you're raised in a school from a very young age, it's still a part of your identity. And um, identity is it's part of the core of your being. Like, how do you rebuild it? You know,
Yeah.
and that's what the book's about. It's about rebuilding identity.
Exactly. How did you go about? How hard is it to try and strike that balance between the humor and the more emotional topics? You have to sort of, do you have a process where you try and balance things out, or does it just come naturally to you? Or
Oh, you just listen to the characters. Like I do write from the point of view of characters. And
Mhm.
so when characters are reacting, like this is how they would react. And I have aunties who were raised in the church and who were staunchly Catholic into their late 40s. So I know how they would react after watching them. And I have my own experience, with the church and stuff like that. So I was able to, just extrapolate from there. But mostly you just listen to your characters and wherever they take you, however it may feel that it's not in keeping with what history and what we know now, you
Mhm.
just go with that because like there's probably still people in this world who don't want to use the word First Nation. They want to use Indian. But if you listen to the reasons why they want to use Indian over First Nation, you'd actually find that they're very similar to the reasons why we use First Nation. So you just sort of have to trust the feelings behind the views that maybe you don't agree with.
So when it comes to, there's quite a few characters in the novel, and when you write from the different points of view, is there a character that you had in the novel that you enjoyed writing from their point of view more than the others?
Oh, you know what? I really enjoyed writing those travelogues from Edna's point of view. But I wouldn't, and normally there is a character I prefer above everyone else a little bit, but no, in this one, they were quite evenly, I evenly disliked and liked them all. Like John, I always felt like, come on, dude, get it into your head. This is it. This is the love of your life. Grab
Yeah.
it before they go away. With Edna, I was just like, come on, lady, leave the church. And with Nadine, I was like, you might try too hard once in a while. Like, no, they were all about the same. Although many people who write to me always talk about Edna being the core of the book. And I think ultimately she is the core, right? She's the miracle seeker. Out of all of them, they didn't know that they needed a miracle, but Edna's the one who knew.
Yeah, I have to say Edna was, I'm probably torn between Edna and John, but Edna I think is probably my favorite character from the book. There was just something about her, and she's just so gruff, and she's not going to take any nonsense from anybody. And although with the gruffness, sometimes I think I lost sight of that. She's not really as old as she comes across as and it's just how her life is sort of weathered her and sort of brought on that personality out of her. So yeah, but I think she has some of the funniest moments, I think, in the entire book, especially when we're getting close to I don't want to give away how the book ends to anybody or anything, but sort of those concluding chapters, she's so funny. I just loved it. One thing that I noticed is many of the characters in the book aren't who they initially appear to be.
Yes.
There's either they're hiding something or something's revealed about them later on. Was this a conscious decision that you made when plotting out the book, or did sort of who they were change over the course of the book and that was revealed?
Absolutely. That's just the intuitive part of writing. And even when I picked the name of one of the characters, it was based on this guy that I met through Facebook. And he was just this really fun guy who'd always who was funny and sweet and intelligent. And I always commented on my posts and always left a great message. And then at one point I was like, hey, can I use your name in a novel? And he's like, yep. And I don't know why he allowed me to do it. He even described where he was from the Hunkapapa people in the States. And that is the character. So I don't know. I should probably send him a copy of the book, just to say that I did it.
I enjoy that. Yeah.
But I know even when I asked to use his name, I didn't know that that's where the character was going to go. To me, the character was just going to be one of the dancers. And I didn't know that it was going to be that particular situation. So.
Oh, awesome. Well, we're almost about halfway through, so maybe we'll turn to the reading that you've prepared for us.
Okay.
Let you read that and give our audience a greater sense of the book, and then we can carry on with our conversation.
Okay, so I'm going to start from chapter 1. So it sort of gives you a sense of the structure of the chapters. Day 1, Sunday, June 11th, 1972, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. John. It was John Greyeyes' first time flying, and he wasn't exactly nervous, more curious than anything at this airport with so many people coming and going, shooting him curious looks as they passed. All monias, not even a single brown, black, red, or yellow shade to draw the eye, which meant that he stood out like a donkey at a horse track with his long braids snaking out from under his cowboy hat down the sides of his chambray shirt. John hadn't put too much thought into his attire. Someone could choke on the dust from his boots, and from the draft he was feeling, he was pretty sure his faded jeans had more than one hole and maybe one more wash left in them. His clothes were clean, though. His mom had made sure of that. She'd come over last night, convinced that a bachelor like him had forgotten the important things in his packing. She was right. Never even packed any gitch, she scolded him. Well, Europe's been around a long time. Pretty sure they have underwear figured out, he said. People over there are different, she told him. Crazy, smaller, loud. Yes, Mom, they're all leprechauns. She didn't find that too funny. Of course, Lenore Greyeyes was the type who couldn't laugh when she was nervous, and she was nervous about sending her baby all the way to that Europe, even though he was a grown man of 30. Hey, Ratface! John turned and saw his brother stroll through the front doors. When they were younger, they'd almost looked like twins, but Amos had taken another path since then. While John had become a rancher, Amos had elbowed his way into becoming the chief of the Fine Day Reserve. His hair was cut into a neat brush cut, his pants were slacks, and he wore a suit jacket, no tie, which meant he wasn't on his way to a white guy meeting. As if, very good. John looked pointedly at Amos's midsection. Amos was getting quite the potbelly, evidence that he spent too much time sitting around in boardrooms making decisions about problems on the reserve and then having no money to turn the decisions into actions. That kind of life would slowly drive John insane, but Amos thrived on it. A bit too much, it appeared. Amos stopped a foot in front of John and looked into his younger brother's right eye. He examined people's eyes at length. John had told him 1,000,000 times that it was annoying as hell, but John said he needed to see a man before he could talk to him. After a moment of communing with John's reluctant spirit, Amos said, "Thank you for doing this." John would have blushed if he wasn't so dark. "Yeah, well, it's Europe. I should be thanking you." Amos laughed. "No need to lie, bro." John smiled. They both knew John was full of shit. Amos had called him 3 days before with the ask, "I'm in trouble, little bro. You have to help me." John had been breathless after running in to answer the phone. He'd been cleaning saddles on the front porch when he heard the phone. It almost never rang unless someone was having a baby, getting hitched, or died. John's first instinct when he heard his brother's taut voice was to hang up. But then his brother twisted the knife and his voice dropped to the volume of a summer breeze. "You owe me." Seemed like the whole world had gone silent in that moment, as John's thoughts raced backwards, back to when they were kids standing in a moonlit bathroom making promises. John took a deep breath. Rent always comes due. Of course, it would have to be something that involved all of his least favorite things: travel, dealing with people, and money. The dance troupe got some food poisoning, said Amos. Damn near shitting themselves to death. Doctors say they can't even leave their beds, never mind the country. Can you believe it? John had no idea what dance troupe Amos was talking about, and his silence probably communicated that, because Amos went on. The Prairie Chicken Dance Troupe, organized by that Red Cloud woman. Remember her? John had the vague memory of a small woman with long, curly black hair. Kind of? She lives across the road from you. Jesus, do you ever pull your head out of your ass? This was a constant bone of contention between the brothers. Amos thought his brother acted too stuck up, and John thought he should mind his own business. I'm going to hang up. Sorry, you lead a very full and exciting life, all by yourself. Amos's voice was picking up speed. Anyways, her troupe was supposed to go to a bunch of festivals in Europe, starting off with that Swedish festival for all those Indians from all over the world, a goodwill tour kind of thing. Then they were supposed to head to Germany. Apparently the Nazis love Indians. They're not Nazis anymore, Amos. That was more than 25 years ago. Amos grunted. Always be Nazis to me. Their dad had gone to Germany to fight. I was buried over there in a field. Glad you're not in charge of foreign relations. Listen to me. I don't have anyone else, or I would have went to anyone else. You can drum, you can dance, play any damned instrument, and I trust you. I haven't danced in over 10 years. John had stopped after his late Kokum Yellow Belly had been laid in the ground. She'd been the reason he started dancing, and when she passed, he didn't feel like doing it without her. And by that time, he was needed at the ranch anyway. Don't give me that, Amos said. Dancing is like riding a horse. When was the last time you rode a horse? Who cares? I hate those damn things. John clucked his tongue. So why not just chuck it all? A pause. John knew his brother was choosing his words carefully, which meant a big sell was coming. He was taking all of his $10 words and making them simple for his little brother to understand. You know the National Indian Brotherhood? It sounds like a bunch of guys that go camping together and sing Kumbaya around a fire. They're damn powerful here and in Ottawa. Even down in the States, they got pull. John laughed at the annoyance in his brother's voice. Anyway, I promised them I would make this happen. I was put in charge, and you know that I have aspirations, beyond the reserve. Aspirations coming out of your ass. John also knew that his brother had a pretty wife and 5 children, and this made his decisions more loaded than John's ever could be. Diarrhea or no diarrhea, this shit needs to happen, and you are the only person I trust. You said that. I meant it. I know I'm asking a lot. 15 days with 3 people you've never met, traveling through all these foreign countries with a bunch of strangers. Amos paused, but this could be good for you. You never leave your farm anymore. Trust Amos to turn John doing a favor into Amos doing a favor for him. It's a ranch, Amos. You live out there all alone. You never go anywhere. You're never running around with anyone. You don't go to any parties. You don't go on any drunks. It's not normal. You're 30, not 80. John laughed because they were on the phone and his brother couldn't see his face the way John's eyes scraped the horizon outside. I was searching for something and I didn't even know what it was. So then, how would I even know, even if I found it? Stop there.
It's such a wonderful book, and I just love the dialogue between John and Amos. It just strikes so true as dialogue, like how siblings talk to one another. It's great, and from there on, the book gets greater and greater as it goes on. One thing I should mention to our audience: if you do have any questions for Don, down at the bottom of your screen there's the Q&A box. You can click on that and type your question in, and I will read it out. I'll move on with a few more of my questions while we're waiting for any audience questions. With all the crazy moments that happen in the book, did you ever have any ideas that you decided that to not include? You just thought this is too crazy, nobody would ever believe this?
No, I don't think so. I think I included every crazy thing. I think, well, there was one scene in the travelogue that I wanted to include, and that was where they were out by the fountain, like pooling money together to, buy food. And I
Yeah.
couldn't quite figure out how to include that. So I think
Okay.
that scene I didn't quite get to. But I think everything else, yeah, it's pretty crazy. And when I did write the book, I should mention that one of my favorite books in the whole world is a book that's I think it's called 1587, A Year in the Life of Shakespeare. I probably have the year wrong, but basically, Shakespeare, the writer historian, basically followed the whole year and then all the plays that Shakespeare wrote, because Shakespeare was extremely prolific, and he probably wrote 4 plays that year. And it talked about how each play was influenced by the things that were happening in his life. Like he committed in that year to being a playwright. He could have become a poet, but he decided to become a playwright. So it talks about the personal stuff that was going on. It also talked about all the historical stuff. So when I was writing, the book, I tried to research everything that was happening in 1972, the music, the movies. And one thing that stood out, which I was shocked at, was the hijackings. Apparently, people were hijacking planes in that
Yeah.
time. And so, I had to include that, of course.
Yeah, it's crazy that all of a sudden when I started reading it and when I got into that scene and all of a sudden it's like, wow, there's actually a plane hijacking going on. How did these people manage to have the worst luck and they get into these such crazy situations? When you were decided to write the book, and I know the article was originally from 1972, did you make a conscious decision to leave it in 1972, or did you ever consider bringing the book into a more contemporary time?
No, it had to be 1972. I think because to me that was really important to show the connection between the other Indigenous movements, and like even the hijacking is conducted by a Black Pride group. And so I think it just showed like everybody who's throwing off the shackles of colonialism. And so I really wanted to show like what that process in a tiny, tiny way, how it was happening across a lot of different cultures at the same time. It When I was about 21 or 22, I was in law school at Queen's, and we watched the movie Once Were Warriors, which is a Maori movie from New Zealand. And the movie was just so like, it was about a woman who was enduring domestic abuse, but who at the same time was the daughter of a chief. And I just remember feeling like, wow, so it wasn't just First Nations in Saskatchewan that were affected by colonialism. It was like so many other cultures. And so I think I really wanted to capture that in the same way that Once Were Warriors captured it, because I think when you are part of a group that has been colonized and you have this dysfunction and you have this trauma, there's a part of you that believes that you did something wrong, or that it's inherent inside of you. And seeing it in other cultures and tracing those same measures being enforced on you, it's kind of healing, So I think that was important to me, that it was part of a movement, a worldwide movement.
Okay. You mentioned doing all the research about finding out what was going on in 1972. Did you ever make any attempt to try and find the people, talk to the actual dance troupe members or the person who wrote the article, or
No,
information to go on?
There was and there wasn't, because I ended up losing the original article, and so I just have like the images burned in my head.
Yeah.
But I mean, I had it all collected together, but I mean, I've moved like 5 times since then, so I never really was able to really keep it. But I'm sure if I looked, I might be able to track them down. But no, it would be great to find them, because the pictures. There was this one picture of like 2 dancers on a stage, female dancers, and they're both wearing sunglasses. And I was like, what's going on there?
Looks like we do have an audience question. I'm just gonna pull it up so I can see it while still talking to you. They say, I love all the humor in your books, and I know you're a comedian as well. Do you write humor in your books the same way you approach a comedy show?
Well, when you write stand-up, the best way to write stand-up is to get on stage and just have like a general idea of what you're going to talk about. And then you talk to the audience and then you write the joke as you're on stage. When you're writing, it doesn't quite work like that. It works a little bit differently. You have a scenario and you have a couple characters and then you sort of like write the jokes in. However, you could still go back in later and then write the jokes based on joke construction, which is, because joke writing is a craft and it's basically set up punchline, 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 punchline. And then the other punchlines are called tags. So yeah, you can go back in and write more jokes in as you need to. And but in stand-up, yeah, you should generally be on stage to write them. Or say if you're talking to some friends, like you basically have to be performing them. Like some of my best jokes came from performing them in front of my friends and then selling them on stage.
You also mentioned that sort of when you were in law school, so are you still practicing law or?
Oh, well, I am a CEO of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. And so I don't practice so much as I work with lawyers all the time,
Okay.
like.
So what led you along the path from law to becoming a writer?
I hated law so much and I felt so very, very scared that was going to be my life. Because I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't think I was good enough. And I didn't think that was a real life that someone could have. I'd never met anyone who was a writer. And so I remember I was in the last year of law school and I was like, man, I have made a wrong turn. And my parents were like, you know what, just finish it. Then you can become a writer. And so I finished it. Then I articled and then I went off to become a writer. And then I ended up getting, of course, an amazing day job. And so that's where I am now. And I write in the corners of life.
That's awesome. Do you have any advice for aspiring writers and what they should do? And how to break sort of into the business of writing?
Well, that's really two questions, because the first question is to write, right?
Yeah.
And if you're going to write, then I would say read Stephen King's book. And Stephen King is one of my favorite writers. Read Stephen King's book on writing. And on writing, if you look at his book, he'll basically tell you everything you need to know, which is you got to read, you got to write. Those are the only two things you need to do. However, if you're approaching about like how to become a paid writer, well then, unfortunately, the best thing to do is to go to a master of fine arts, get a fine arts degree. And that seems to be the best way to promote yourself as a writer. However, you got to pay for that degree. So do you just want to risk it by what's your goal really? To just write and get your writing out there? Or is it to, learn how to, set yourself up for, maybe a really great first novel? I've never had a really great first novel. I've had novels that have won awards, but I've never had say great bestsellers that would support me. But I like the way that I did it. And I think it was really just about writing books that I wanted to write. And I was always a little bit nervous about being too influenced, because I think I might be easily influenced. I didn't want to be influenced by other people. I just wanted to write what I liked at the time.
It was interesting in this book, when I was reading the acknowledgements, you made a comment that this was the first book that you felt sort of you had a place putting acknowledgements in it. I can't remember quite how you phrased it. Do you feel better about your writing and in the place that you're in now?
Yeah, and I definitely, I think for a long time there was Dawn and then there was Dawn the writer. And I do feel that now the two are the same. And my friends have been reading the book and they will text me in real time what they think of the book and what they think about the characters. And in the past, I would have just went screaming away from that. But now I'm just like, yes, I do agree. That is a very good point. And yes, that's absolutely true. And I'll even explain things and stuff like that. And I've never had that before. I never had the people in my life like read the books that I read. I mean, just as a little snapshot into Native family dysfunction, like it was like almost like my family didn't even acknowledge that I was a writer. Like after I wrote the first book, they were just sort of like, no, that's interesting, and then they've completely forgot about it. And no one ever acknowledged that I was a writer. And it's only been like I'm older now and a lot more confident, and I'm able to put the two pieces of myself together and be like, yeah, I am a writer, and yeah, people are going to see the things that I write, and they're going to comment on it, and I'll respond.
How has your family enjoyed the Prairie Chicken Dance Tour? Did they enjoy it?
They have not said anything.
Oh no.
Like I said, it's like it doesn't exist.
When it comes to writing about sort of Indigenous traditions, and when you're talking about like the different dances and everything, is there a lot? Do you feel any pressure that you really have to get your research and making sure that everything's sort of correct, so that you're not putting out wrong information about when it comes to cultural information like that?
I did do the research, and I was a fancy dancer, so I
Okay.
have that information. I was actually taught by a young man, and
Okay.
who knew all the dances, and so that's where I learned my information from. Yeah, did I really go and check it with everybody? No, because I think that when you over research things and you over worry about stuff like that, people will bog you down, because guess what? People will always find things, always find problems. As for putting out wrong information, I put out the information that I was taught. So
But yeah, that's the best way of doing it. And we had a question that was sent in to us by email ahead of time, and they wanted to know if that you had ever considered revealing Edna's. She has a pretty big secret when it comes to her relationship with another character. Did you ever ever think about revealing that secret in the book to the other characters?
oh gosh, it just doesn't fit with Edna, right? Because Edna's just so full of secrets and
Yeah.
and things. So, and it's just such at the core of her little tightly wound being that she's just not a secret teller, unfortunately. She'll keep it to the grave. And that's how a lot of the older generation are. There, to them, there's honor in keeping secrets and in respecting other people's stories, because she made a decision at a young age, and she kept that promise. And to her, that's what it is. She's absolutely protecting someone's life, and she's not going to risk it for anything.
I really loved the relationship between the two characters, that how her niece sort of, they grew together, and I think there was a more of a respect for Edna by the end of the book, just as events went on, and especially when there's that final scene, and she's one of the final scenes, and is doing a dance to try and allow Edna to continue on her mission. I really enjoyed that, and how she had sort of come around from being a sort of I guess what you would call your typical teenager going into adulthood, where they sort of have that attitude. It was great to see that growth on Desiree's part.
Desiree is a very interesting character. She's based on someone I know, and who is astoundingly beautiful, and who is fully aware of the power of her beauty, which I find so interesting. But yeah, she's a great character, and so unembarrassed about it.
Oh, with basing characters on people you know, do you let the people know that you've based a character on them, or do you just sort of let them sort of figure it out and see if they recognize themselves in the book at all, or?
I think they would be embarrassed, and it's kind of like like if you ever had someone tell you like, oh, I saw someone who looked like you, and then you see the person, and then you're like, that person's kind of ugly, like it never goes well. And so with my characters, it's more of a personal thing where, yes, in my head, that's that person. But no, I never tell them, because I always feel like if they recognize it, then good. But mostly they just read the book and they never say anything.
Book sort of ends with all the characters have reached a certain point in their lives and they've gone through some change. Have you ever thought about writing any more about any of the characters? Because some of them, they're sort of like loose ends, and you're not sure exactly what's going to happen to them. Do you ever see yourself going back to them and seeing how their lives turned out?
If I was younger, I would say yes. But as an adult, I would say no. Because, say there's a certain character who is going to follow up on what I think is the love of his life. But what is love really? Love is boring. Like real good, true love is just boring, and so who wants to read about that, and but mostly love is like, it's short and it's beautiful for a short period of time, and then someone gets bored or someone gets sick or whatever. I think I just like to write about the promise of love, or those moments, those special moments that people share, because that's what writing is, right? It's just moments.
Right. Did all of the characters sort of, did they end up, do you ever contemplate different paths for them? Did they end up sort of where you wanted them to be, or did you ever contemplate changing a path for any of the characters?
You know what? Like, I am kind of a romantic. So I really, really wanted Edna to end up with a certain person. I really did. And she didn't. She did not. And I couldn't tell you why, but Edna's so damn stubborn,
Yeah.
I don't know where she's going to end up, but she did not end up the way I wanted her to end up. So they don't always do what I want them to do.
Yeah, I really thought that Edna was going to, I thought that the relationship was going to go somewhere, and I was surprised when it didn't. And it's like, Edna, what are you thinking? Please, like, come on.
No, she would not. Nope.
And the other character that I sort of wondered if there'd be a different path for them was Shane Buffalo. I almost expected him to show up again later in the book, that something would have happened and that he was going to reappear, and it didn't happen either. And so there's all these sort of like ideas that I had when I was reading. It's like, oh, I'm sure this is going to happen, and then your character is totally just
no. Shane,
expectations.
When I think of Shane, I always think of like a wild horse, and he could never be captured, right?
Yeah.
So he has to, whether he returns or not, it's going to be on his terms.
He was such a wonderful character that he comes across he's so arrogant to begin with, and then especially when they're in Germany, you see that the vulnerable side to him. And it really touched me, and it really made me sort of change my opinion on who he was and how he turned out. So you did a wonderful job there with him.
Well, he's very young too, right? So
yeah,
that's something we forget. Like, they're so young. They're like 18, 19 years old, two of those characters, so they think completely different. Their brains aren't even developed until they're 25.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. One of our questions that we've had submitted for you here is if you have any recommendations for books or authors that you think people should turn to, and somebody was particularly interested in any Indigenous authors that you could recommend.
Oh, sure. Well, I'm a big fan of Alicia Elliott. I think she's
Oh,
just magical. I just love her. I think she's such a brave writer. Kateri Akwianzi Dam is a fantastic writer. My friend Kelly Jo Burke just wrote. Okay, you guys won't even see Kateri Akwianzi Dam's new book of poetry, but because I've known her for years, I got to read it during the pandemic, and I just hated her because I wrote two books during the pandemic, and they both need a lot of work, aka sucked. But she just writes this amazing book of poetry, and I'm like, where the what? Like, and she just played it off like it was nothing. But she wrote an amazing book of poetry. But she's an amazing writer. My friend Kelly Jo Burke wrote a memoir that is just like, oh, you're just like there's twists, and it's just like a fantastic book. It's called Wreck. You should pick it up. You know, Canadian writers don't get enough attention. Um, I also read a lot of nonfiction, and I'm a big fan of Ronan Farrow's book uh, uh, about Harvey Weinstein, which I read it all the time. I really enjoy it. Like he mixes the facts in with like his own personality, and it's really entertaining and hard to read. But I think it's really important that people understand like the complexities of the way the world conspires to protect sexual offenders, and that's really important. If you want to understand Indigenous narratives, because look how many different forces protected the people that harmed First Nations people. So, but I mean, there's so many other Indigenous writers. I would say that try to read as many memoirs of residential school survivors. I have Francis Akamusa's book that I've been reading and reading, delving into. It's difficult. It's a difficult read, but yeah, just if you do it, you won't regret it. It's hard to read, but I mean, it was much harder to live it, and certainly to find the courage to tell it. So I think we definitely owe it to those children.
yeah, with Saskamus's book, we read it and we were really saddened to hear that he had passed away over the last year. And because we're really hoping that we could actually invite him to the Word on the Street Festival, so this we could share those experiences and people can get that knowledge firsthand from somebody. So anybody I highly recommend it as well. So do you have any, well, I'll leave that question for last. We're running out of time here, but my coworker and I were discussing, we were looking at your biography and everything today. And is it true that you were on an episode of One Life to Live? And
I was.
How did that happen?
First of all, I went out for auditions for only two things in New York City, and I got both of them. And
congrats.
The first one I got was I had gained quite a bit of weight in New York because all I did was like eat peanut butter and do stand up because I was broke, right? And at one point I could only fit my pajama pants, and I went to this like go see. It was a modeling gig. And I remember being in the elevator, those New York elevators where they're metal and they go up, right? So standing in an elevator, and I was like, I must have been watching so much Oprah because my esteem was through the roof. And I was in an elevator with a bunch of models, and I'm 5'4", and the models were like, I was basically at their chests, and we all did the go see. And then at one point I was like, when does this shoot? Like, yeah. Why would I be asking, right? When does this shoot? And this beautiful model, I'll never forget. She was like she was black, and she was just like probably the most gorgeous person I've ever seen. And she, flipped through her phone and she told me the date very kindly, probably thinking, what? But everybody was so kind, and I got it. I got to be in a. It was like a national ad for. I think it was for like. Whatever the American CRA is. So it was a CRA ad.
Okay, yeah.
So I got that. And then I went to the One Life to Live, and I don't watch soap operas, but I was actually in a soap opera scene with the one character that I did recognize. I can't remember her name, but she has like chubby cheeks. She was from Young and the Restless, and then she transferred over to One Life to Live.
Okay.
And I remember being like, oh my goodness, she's here. She was super tall. But I always remember her, she had a chubby face, and I have a chubby face. And so I keep track of other people who have chubby faces, because I'm like, hey, hello, fellow chubby face person. And yeah, and then at the end of the scene, they do the scene and you do your lines, and then they just stare at you. And then the scene breaks. But that moment of staring is like 1,000 years.
Oh yeah, it's intimidating.
It's extremely intimidating, but it was yep, absolutely. It was I had 11 lines, so it was awesome.
So for our final question for tonight is, do you have any upcoming projects that you can tell us about?
I'm writing a screenplay, but I can't really, I don't want to talk too much about that, but it is comedy. And then I also have those 2 books that I wrote during the pandemic. One of them was a novel. It's about a woman who solves crimes, and then she gets drawn into investigating some serial killers, a serial killer working in her town. And then the other one is a sequel to Rose's Run. And in the first Rose's Run, they encountered zombies, and in this one, it's vampires. So
Sounds interesting. Okay, so we're right on the edge of 8 o'clock. So I want to thank Dawn so much for joining us this evening. It's been wonderful talking to you tonight, and for finishing off the fall reading series for us. Just a reminder to anyone in the audience that the Prairie Chicken Dance Tour is available for purchase through our official bookseller, through the University of Lethbridge bookstore. They have a link on their website so you can purchase a copy, because I believe the library's copies are all out at the moment, so you might have to wait for a little bit. So go out and grab a copy for a Christmas gift for someone. I'm sure they would appreciate it. They'll be laughing out loud like I was when I was reading it. But again, Dawn, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. I really appreciate you guys inviting me. Have a great night.
Okay. Good night, everyone.